Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are right now. And welcome to this webinar on developing transformational partnerships to catalyze SDGs implementation. My name is Darian Stibby. I am the director of the Partnering Initiative, a UK-based NGO, which was set up to really help to drive effective collaboration between business and other actors, business and government, and NGOs and civil society, and the UN towards sustainable development. And we are one of the partners with UNDESA and Global Compact and UN Office of Partnerships and UNDCO with the Partnership Accelerator, a new program that's been set up to really help to accelerate SDG collaborations, including building the partnering capacity of individuals, creating new ideas, new concepts for partnerships through national partnership fora, supporting institutional capacity to partner, as well as building platforms that are required to much more systematically create collaborations for the SDGs. And we've developed a range of guidance, including the SDG Partnership Guidebook, which begins to look at transformational partnerships, as well as undertaking research and running national workshops in Kenya with multiple others still to come. And this session is really at the heart of what the Partnership Accelerator is all about, because we know that if we are to achieve the SDGs, we can no longer be tinkering at the surface. We need to be fundamentally shifting and changing the way that we live, work, and operate. And international development is shifting. It has changed towards much more transformational approaches. And partnerships, as we will hear today, are a really essential mechanism to lead towards transformation. We have quite an exciting group of people, including, starting off, David Smith, Dr. David Smith, who's the co-author and member of the independent group of scientists for the 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report. David's going to introduce what we mean by transformational development and what actually happens in practice. Then we're going to be going into sort of examples. We're going to be looking with Bianca Kopp at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and Ms. Gilhe van der Lunt, who's the Secretary General of the International Association of Universities, who are going to be looking at one of the key levers, one of the key tools towards system transformation, which is around partnering with educators and academia. And then we're going to be looking at a really exciting tool, which is really sort of looking at the whole sort of system mapping, how any particular issue, in this case education, fits within an overall system. We know SDGs are interlinked. Well, this is an incredible tool for which Bryony Guthrie from the World Economic Forum is going to show us about how you can visualize the linkages across all of these issues. Now, all the way during this next hour and 25 minutes or so, you are very welcome at any point to put in questions. There's a Q&A you will see. You will also see a chat function as well. And the chat function, if you want to chat with panelists or attendees, if you want to put in any resources that you'd like people to see, or even any comments and thoughts and questions, but any questions we'd like you to put in the Q&A if possible. And I can see that people are already beginning to look at the Q&A, and all the way through, I shall try to bring in some of the voices from the attendees as well, and to have something of a conversation with panelists. But with no further ado, I would like to welcome David Smith to introduce the session. David.
Thank you very much, and greetings to everybody from Jamaica. I would like to point out that one of the main findings of the Global Sustainable Development Report of 2019 had to do with linkages. And the point there is that most of the Sustainable Development Goals are linked in one way or another, even at the target level. And if you are trying to pursue a single goal, even if that goal might be the most important to you or to your country, then it's likely that by pursuing a single goal, you may miss out on opportunities, but worse, you may also impede your own progress. So the key that we recommend is that pursuit of the goals takes into account the linkages between different targets and seeks to maximize on those areas where you can get win-win interlinkages and try to minimize those areas where you may end up with problems, vicious cycles, and trade-offs. The picture to the right with the circles, the red ones show interactions between the SDGs that are not good, and the blue circles are areas where there are co-benefits. So if you look at that, you'll see that there are plenty of opportunities for co-benefits by pursuing not single goals, but several goals. As a result, we suggested that rather than pursue single goals, pursue entry points for transforming society to the kinds of societies that we would like. And those refer to human well-being and capabilities, sustainable and just economies, energy, not just decarbonizing it, but also making sure everyone has access to energy, food systems and nutrition patterns, communities and cities and urban development, and the global environmental commons. And that across all of these areas, we should make sure that we use the following levers. One has to do with science and technology. The next is action. That is the individual actions and collective actions. Then there is economy and finance, and then governance. And these should be applied across the board. For an example, we found that in the Caribbean, COVID deaths and also COVID infections are not related to the population of the Caribbean islands, nor is it related to GDP per capita. So the richer islands are not doing better than the poorer ones. What actually makes the best difference between whether or not people are dying of COVID and whether they're being infected has to do with government intervention, the actions of individuals, and their collective action based on the best science that is available. Which brings me to the next point that we made. Mind matters more than money. And that's, in a sense, very good news. It means that by using education to increase human capital, development can proceed. We can achieve the sustainable development goals. We can improve human well-being in all our societies and in all our countries. Education has a variety of different benefits, and it can improve people's resilience to disasters, even when you remove the factors such as their increased or differential income. National resilience is improved by education, and tertiary education is absolutely vital to achieve sustainable development. As we move forward, though, we're finding that we are encountering different kinds of development problems. By and large, we've solved many of the problems where we know a lot about the underlying systems and we agree on the values. Those are the so-called simple problems. We are, in some cases, addressing complicated problems where we understand the system, but we disagree on the values. In some cases, we need to do more scientific research. We know what we want out of the situation, but we don't know enough about the system to be able to solve the problem. But more and more, we're encountering wicked problems where we disagree on values and we disagree on what we want out of the problem, how we can phrase the problem, and we also have gaps in our knowledge. And so these are examples of different kinds of problems. And the problem with wicked problems is that the way in which we approach, say, a simple problem or a straightforward problem cannot actually solve a wicked problem. We need to look at multidisciplinary approaches, transdisciplinary and non-traditional approaches. Government, academia, and private sector all need to learn new ways of working with each other and changing the existing ways of working. So we shouldn't be looking at science versus economics. We should be getting our policymakers, our politicians, our scientists, and our academic institutions to work together with business and civil society. It also means the role of knowledge brokers is more important than it ever has been. Those are the people who can speak the languages of people on the several different sides and help them to understand what it is that people want and what it is that people have found out, and translate that into ways in which science, for example, can influence policy. It means, though, that we're going to have to change the way in which institutions work. Academic institutions need to be able to change the way that they incentivize their staff. Governments need to change the way in which they may have incentivized business and the way in which they pay for research. Businesses have to start working with academia to try and move some of the research that they fund, and businesses fund most of the research going on in the world, into research that will help to solve sustainable development problems. So I'm going to leave you with 3 different problems, which we may choose to look at later on throughout the session. One is the wicked problem of winning the lotto. What happens if you are a lesser developed country and suddenly you find great reserves of oil? Does that mean that you are on the pathway to prosperity and everything is fine? Often in lesser developed countries and developing countries, it does not mean that. For one thing, the oil company that you're negotiating with has a much larger income than you do. The increase in wealth can stress governance systems, increase inequality, fuel corruption, and it will not meet your expectations. So how do you develop your country without having to worry about substituting things like GDP per capita for your original plan, which was to improve human well-being? Many less developed countries, small island developing states, and OECD countries and other countries rely on tourism for a great part of their economy. Tourism is highly tied up with other parts of the economy, but it's a very, very vulnerable sector. And when tourism gets hit by something like climate change or disease or an economic downturn, it will have negative impacts that spread throughout society. On the other hand, tourism provides much needed employment, but low-skilled workers in the tourism sector may not be able to move to any other sector, and they may simply become unemployed. How do you diversify your economy? How do you increase the size of your economy if you're highly tourism dependent? And on this point, we should bear in mind that UNCTAD has just released a report on the impact of COVID on tourism, and it makes very sobering reading. And then, of course, there's the wicked problem of inequality and how that relates to corruption and nepotism. Corruption, as we know, affects good governance and creates financial and economic loss, but it facilitates individual actions. If I need a piece of government paper and the normal procedure takes 3 or 4 days and numerous barriers that I have to go through, isn't it a lot easier and a lot better for me and my company simply to facilitate that by talking to this gentleman who I know will help me, and maybe tip him a little bit when he does that? It affects our ability to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, but it may occur at all levels of government. It's often driven by inefficient systems, poor transparency and poor accountability, but it's often accepted culturally in many countries. And many corrupt acts do not violate national laws. So how do we reduce corruption if it's not perceived as wrong? How do we reduce corruption when corruption may widely be perceived as the way business has to get done, because business has to get done? And maybe our procedures and our mechanisms aren't set up for efficiency and helping us to get the job done. So these are 3 questions I'd like to leave you with for further debate as we move on during what I hope will be a very interesting and exciting session. Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much. Before you go, though, just a couple of questions. I wonder if you would mind just defining transformational development for us, and maybe give an example of what that means so that the audience can really get a feel for it.
We spoke about transformation because we believe that if we're going to achieve the goals and change the way in which society works, we can't just do it incrementally with business as usual, even accelerated business as usual. We have to completely change what we're doing. So if, for example, we're trying to feed the world, we can't do that by simply upscaling present agricultural systems. All that will do is deforest much of the world, and we still won't be feeding anybody. So we need to transform the agricultural sector. We need to transform our food chains and our value chains. So it's about real change, not just simply ramping up what we're doing already.
So in essence, you're moving from a sort of an unsustainable state, and you're using all these different levers and pathways to transform it into a sustainable state that no longer has to have all this external input to be able to make it work.
Exactly. That's why
it's no longer having externalities to problems.
Right.
Great. Thank you.
That's why we emphasize these just and sustainable economics quite a lot.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. And as questions come in, then we will bring them up, and already people are saying how thought-provoking your wicked problems were. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
David. So we're going to move on to look at one of these levers that are required for many types of system transformations. So over to you, Bianca Kopp from the UN Office of Drugs and Crime. I think you're starting off.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, David, for introducing our session. Let me just quickly share my screen. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning from Vienna. We are very proud to be in today's session, and David, thank you again for introducing and for choosing so interesting big problems. I will, in my presentation, use one of your problems that you mentioned related to corruption. But what I actually want to show and I want to talk about in my presentation is basically how we have stopped doing things as we have done them before, how we started basically doing business as usual, and how we as an organization have realized that exactly what David has said, focusing on one SDG alone is not good enough. However, before I talk a little bit about how we have been using in the past partnerships to achieve the SDGs, let me introduce a little bit the organization I'm working for. So I'm working for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and many of you will not have heard about it before. Our headquarters in Vienna, we are a little bit away from the political discussions in New York, and we have basically worked a little bit focusing in silo on our mandate areas. Our mission statement is to help member states to make the world safer from drugs, crime, and terrorism. And in the past, we have done so by working very closely with our national counterparts, with police, so with law enforcement, judges and prosecutors, to strengthen the national capacity of those stakeholders. But we have realized a few years ago that this is not good enough. We can strengthen their capacities, but this does not really lead to crime prevention. It does not really lead to a stronger rule of law around the world. So my office, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the SDG that we are normally focusing on is SDG 16. But as I said, we have slowly started rethinking of our approach. And as many of you know, the UN member states, different stakeholders, including academia, civil society, are meeting every year in London, in New York, to discuss the status of the implementation of the SDGs. Last year, the focus was on SDG 16 among other goals, and we have realized that we are a little bit off track. So early this year, the UN Secretary General has basically called for a decade of action. And what was very interesting for us, and what also relates to what David has said, is that he basically highlighted the need to have a little bit a more broader approach, thinking a little bit outside the box, come up with new solutions to the old problems, and include all sectors of society. And also, as David has mentioned, not only focusing on one SDG, having a look and adopting a more comprehensive approach. And what was also highlighted several times last year, but also this year, early January, was the role of education and higher education. And this was basically good news for us, UNODC, because we've started in 2015, before the 2030 agenda was adopted, we already started discussing with the member states that we need to strengthen there, and we need to change our approach to come up with a stronger rule of law and to be able to strengthen justice worldwide. So in 2015, member states finally agreed and empowered us, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, to think a little bit outside the box and to work with new stakeholders, when they, for the first time, highlighted the importance of education, of educators in achieving just societies, in strengthening rule of law. And this is when our journey started. So when the political declaration, we call it the Doha Declaration, was adopted, highlighting the role of education, this was basically the start of our Education for Justice initiative. Remember again, until 2015, we as UNODC have not really worked with academics, we have not worked with educators, we have worked with law enforcement, judges, and prosecutors. So we had to come up with a very new approach. And being new to education, to SDG 4, we of course had to partner with important stakeholders. So in a nutshell, the Education for Justice initiative is about strengthening the educators to teach the next generation and to address problems that can undermine the rule of law. And at the core of our initiative is really our slogan, Inspire Change Together, really acknowledging that we need to step out the silos that we are all in. The academics on one hand, the UN, the policymakers. And it's about what also David has called for, it's about, brokering the information. We need to build bridges and we need to discuss and talk with each other, developing messages that we understand, so that the policymakers understand the academics and vice versa. So without building bridges, we cannot achieve the SDGs as we know them. So what have we done, and why do we think that the Education for Justice is a good example of transformational partnerships? As I said, we are experts in crime prevention. We are not experts in education. So of course, we need to work with the experts, and the experts are the educators. So we have come up with a threefold approach. One pillar is basically developing together with the academics, together with the educators, tools that educators can use to teach a little bit more about rule of law and on rule of law related topics. Why have we chosen to do this? Because we did a study in 2016 and we realized that there is not enough teaching at the secondary and at the tertiary level related to SDG 16. Especially at the tertiary level, there are not that many courses on corruption, on organized crime, or on any other issues related to SDG 16. And we were thinking we need, in order to make a change, we need to empower the next generation of policymakers, the next generation of judges, the next generation of influencers, to really understand why rule of law, why human rights are so important. So we have started together with hundreds of academics worldwide from several hundred universities to develop teaching material for academics, by academics, for academics. And this has then led us to also come up with a second pillar, because we soon realized that we need to strengthen also the information sharing among these academics. We realized that many of those academics teaching at higher education institutions are facing the same issues and the same challenges. So we have started connecting those lectures, inviting them to workshops, providing a platform to them, and building up cooperation among them, but also with the United Nations. So to really strengthen, and this is also leading now to the third pillar, to strengthen academia's voice. We're doing that by organizing academic conferences together with key partners, such as the International Association of Universities, such as different universities that are leading SDG development. We also bring young academics to those important academic conferences, because we have realized that we often talk, for instance, about the future of higher education, the future of the world, without having the next generation of researchers sitting at the table. So together with partners, we have designed paper competitions for young scholars. We are also giving grants to universities interested in strengthening teaching on rule of law and on promoting SDG 16. So this is, in a nutshell, the three pillars that we are focusing on. One outcome that we are very proud of, that has only been possible because we partnered with academics, we partnered with educators, is our Education for Justice platform. So basically, we have developed more than 120 models for academics to use for their own teaching. We target young academics that just start teaching, that might need a little bit help content-wise, but also senior academics that want to get inspired with new exercises, with innovative case studies, etc. We have developed 9 university courses on the topics that you see in front of you: ethics and integrity, corruption, crime prevention and criminal justice, organized crime, just to mention a few. And again, those models have been developed with hundreds of academics around the world, and it has created a kind of what we call E4J, Education for Justice family. In order to give access to all academics, we have developed not only this material, but we're also providing it for free on our platform. Platform is accessible from everywhere, and we keep on updating it in order to meet the academic standards. So David, this is basically our response when you're saying, what do we do with corruption? UNODC has seen that with our traditional approach, with strengthening the capacity of prosecutors, judges, policymakers alone, we don't fight corruption. We cannot counter corruption. What we need to do is to empower through SDG 4, through education, the next generation. We are doing that at all three levels. We work with primary educators, secondary and tertiary educators. And what you see in front of you is basically the platform on ethics and integrity that we have developed for tertiary level instructors. Here again, bridging and really empowering educators to discuss issues related to rule of law in the classroom. The next picture that you see in front of you is basically kind of outcome what I wanted to show you. This is about partnerships, and this is how partnerships work. We work with leading universities around the world. We have pictures from Oxford University, from South Africa, from around the world, where we bring together our partners being the academics, our partners being the education, the higher education institutions, to discuss with them what we need to change. How can we support each other to achieve the SDGs? And what you see on the right-hand side, or also behind me, these are basically our creative outcome, and we discuss with academics. So in a nutshell, by partnering with new stakeholders, with higher education institutions, and with academics, we as the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime have also learned a lot. So as David was saying, partnering is really a win-win for all. These are some pictures of what we're doing with the young scholars, the paper competition, etc. And again, we are also working with hundreds of universities to really strengthen their efforts in becoming hubs for SDG 16 teaching. And to end my presentation, I again cannot emphasize enough how important it is to build these bridges, between the different stakeholders, between academics, educators, civil society, policymakers. We are all responsible for achieving the SDGs, and we really need to step out of our silo approaches. And in order to do this, we need to invest in partnerships. And one of the most strategic partnership and most valuable partnership for us, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, was or is the partnership with the International Association of Universities. Without the help of the International Association of Universities, I think we would not be here where we are today. We realized that using both networks is advancing, our work is advancing SDG 4 and SDG 16 a lot. And without further ado, I would like to introduce and hand over to my colleague Hilge van Glant, the Secretary General of the International Association of Universities. And she might also talk a little bit about how she sees it and what was the win-win from her side, partnering with the United Nations. With this, thank you so much.
Please go ahead. Thank you very much indeed, Bianca, and Hilge, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bianca, for sharing your time with me as one of our partners of the UNODC projects. I'm very pleased to be with you today. 351 participants is quite impressive. So I'd better speak according to the rules and also address the issues that we've decided to share with you all. I would like to welcome all to this panel and hope to get quite a few questions in the end as well. Transformational partnerships. David, you introduced them very well, and I very much liked your presentation on the wicked problems as well, and what they are and how they should work. And I would really like to engage in further conversation, and I hope that the presentation that I will make in the few minutes that are for me to share with you, I will be able to show how a little bit of the work that we do are to address exactly the kinds of issues that you share, how when you find all of a sudden oil, you transform a society and a country for the better and not only for the value of the very few, how tourism needs to look at ecotourism in the future, and how to discuss corruption on every possible platform in order to address it, make it visible, and to make it possibly disappear. Where I speak from is as Secretary General of the International Association of Universities. It is a non-governmental organization based in Paris at UNESCO. It was created by...
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I'm afraid your sound is getting very poor. Wonder if you could just try and speak as close to the microphone as possible.
I don't think I can possibly be, this is possibly due to the internet connection in Paris that is very unstable today. I'm very sorry about that. So the International Association of Universities is celebrating 70 years of international cooperation, and this is what I would like to show. So I will here share my screen. So this is the topic of today, partnerships for the SDGs with higher education. And I would like to thank Bianca for offering the opportunity to say how much we enjoy the multi-stakeholder partnership with UNODC, where they work on SDGs 16 and 4, more specifically, and 17, also in particular, since this is exactly what we are working on together. We discovered the work of UNODC only in 2019, when we kind of bumped into each other in a very nice way by just discovering what each of us was doing. And we realized that by joining forces, we would be able to actually address SDG 16 in particular in a very constructive way. So what the IAU is doing is pushing higher education and research for sustainable development already for now 30 years or so since the Brundtland report was published. And ever since, we're trying to bring the attention of higher education institution leaders and all the stakeholders inside to the important messages that are now today in Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. The role of higher education is not only to teach, to do research, but is also really focusing on community engagement, and it serves society in the broadest sense. The most important part, we believe at the IAU, is to develop the kind of critical thinking that is required to address the 3 wicked problems that were put to us by David. And universities are really transforming the individuals coming through the system, but society at large. And this is where, in the end, the benefits of any university is for the entire society. And we hope that if this has been clear throughout the pandemic, and is still the case in many countries around the world, this will remain the case in the future as well. So we have been working with UNODC since 2019 and will do so in the future, continue to do so in the future as well, because we strongly believe in everything that Bianca has been presenting in her presentation just a few minutes ago. And indeed, by combining the different SDGs in the way that UNODC does, there is a way to educate the future generations in a different way so that they can become the kind of leaders that we need to address the very big challenges that we all face. Partnerships like those increase outreach and bring in new perspectives for the many. So we hope that the kind of partnerships that we've engaged in will be followed by many others of the same kind. So transformation is the key to everything that we do, and is also the outcome of much of the initiatives that we developed. I've been invited to show one example of what we do more specifically.
If you could be very concise, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, one example is this example. So how would transformational partnerships work, and what can it look like? We have invited universities from around the world to take the lead on each of the SDGs, not to concentrate and silo them out, but to offer an opportunity to develop different kinds of partnerships around it. So through those, we have seen that we wanted to have universities from around the world, and you see them on the list. No need to read them. It is interesting for you to see that we have not picked and chosen universities from particular universities, not according to specific criteria. Maybe the only criteria we have used is for them to be diverse, to be from many different countries, and especially also from the 5 continents. Then the game for them to start was to find institutions from around the world, again representing the 5 continents, in order for them to build the kind of synergies and dynamics that we need to really get to the kind of transformational mentality that is required to address the issues, the challenges that we face, and to maximize on the opportunities that are out there. So there are 2 concrete objectives, that is to serve as a resource and networking hub throughout the world and develop the kind of innovative partnerships that we need to address the goals and maximize the opportunities that are there, and together to serve as a global voice for higher education, serving sustainable development. So the kind of partnerships that we've developed are embedded in other kinds of dynamics with many kinds of partners around the world. So we are very pleased to be here associated with the UNHLPF. We work with UNESCO, we work with the OECD, the Council of Europe, in particular with UNODC. And we hope that by building these bridges between the different kind of stakeholders around the world that do foster sustainable development, we will contribute our little stone to the transformational process that is required for today and for tomorrow. Very few pages where you can find more information, and that will be shared later. And I thank you very much for the time that I've been provided to share just one example. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really exciting to hear just the power that can be brought through your networks, through the convening, through the partnerships. One of the things that's coming up on the chat quite a lot is how do we get involved? So universities are asking, how do we actually get involved? I wonder if you and Bianca could give us an idea of actually how to get involved very briefly.
You want to start, Bianca?
Yes, please. Thank you, Darian. How can you get involved? Check out our website. I mean, we'll follow up after this event by sharing with you the links. Register on our website, contact us. We don't think there's one size fits all a formula in developing partnerships. So we always engage with individuals and also with different universities to see how we can partner. And this relates to another question that was asked with regard to the languages that our models, that our material is available. And there I should mention, we have our models available in almost 7 languages, the official UN languages, and Portuguese. We are very proud of this, and we would not have been able without partnerships. We have partnered with universities around the world that have started translating the more than 5,000 pages peer-reviewed material for us into the different languages, and this has empowered us to have now that much material online in the different languages, and more will follow. So this is also a good example how we can work together and achieve a lot. So, and we are looking forward to partner with you. So contact us, and we will follow up also in writing per email to the participants of this session. Over to you, Helge.
Well, very quickly, I would just echo the same. So please contact us. I think our time is up, and we will maybe have an opportunity to expand on this towards the end of the session.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much, and indeed we will have more discussions towards the end. So we've talked about the interlinkages across the SDGs, and hopefully now we're going to be able to see some of them. Over to you, Brioni.
Thanks, Darian. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and for Bianca, Helge, Darian, what's come before. I'm going to start by asking my colleague Abhinav to share his screen. We're going to start with a poll today. If you could take out your smartphones that I'm sure you all have to hand and just scan that QR code, or alternatively go to slido.com and search for that hashtag Strategic Intelligence HLPF, SIHLPF. You're going to come to a poll. It has about 12 options in it. If you could select the 6 key issues that you think are most relevant to today's education and justice, education and the rule of law theme. So if you just scan that, that same QR code will be on a few of my slides. So please don't worry if you haven't had time to scan it. By the time we move on, you will see it on a few more slides. And with that, thanks, Abhinav. You can stop your share and I will go and start mine. So, as promised, this is the strategic intelligence presentation of the World Economic Forum. Let me just do that again. Great, I hope everyone can see my screen. So, my name is Bryony, and I am going to be presenting strategic intelligence to you. The Strategic Intelligence Platform is a tool that the World Economic Forum has developed with through our network of experts. And it has various applications, and it has an ability to make connections between global issues. In particular, we're going to focus today on the SDGs and how to view them holistically through a systems thinking process. I will focus especially on SDG 4 and 16 and several other issues as well. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera now, just because I'm not important, the presentation is, and I'm going to start with the presentation, and then the main part will be a demonstration of this platform. As we know, the main challenges and opportunities we face today are global in nature. Nothing exists in silo. If we'd forgotten that, then the events of 2020 would have been a harrowing reminder of how an event in one place can have a domino effect globally, such as the effects of a pandemic on the global economy and the share price of Zoom. We live in a world of accelerating complexity, typified by shifting interconnections and interdependencies, and to think in terms of systems supports our ability to forecast and understand the multiple effects of one action, one decision, or one policy, what those might be, both intended and unintended. The author John Hagel said, "We believe there is a sense-making pattern that can help us understand how change takes place in the economy. This pattern is the edge transforms the core." So that pattern is applicable beyond the economy to every aspect of life. And it's the proposition that core issues can be influenced, are influenced, affected, or changed by peripheral events that might not immediately seem obvious. To identify these factors and understand the risks or exploit the opportunities really requires an understanding of both those core and those periphery issues and the dynamic interrelationships at play. These are the principles that underpin the Strategic Intelligence Platform. We use experts to prioritize the core strategic issues, and then we map topics on the periphery and allow users to navigate through those interconnections and ideally end up with a contextual understanding of that core issue. The Strategic Intelligence Platform represents intelligence drawn from our expert network and then augmented by machine intelligence capabilities that we have developed in-house. And this allows users to view issues within their systems and to understand interconnections. The human intelligence aspect is embedded in a network of over 5,000 members of our expert network. These people have various backgrounds. They come from academia, think tanks, NGOs, government, and the private sector. And from this group, we source our co-curators for the map. The co-curators are experts in their field, and they help us to explain and demystify some of the complex core issues featured on the platform. And you'll see now on your screen some of those organizations that we have worked with for this. And then this expert human intelligence is supported by machine intelligence. The machine intelligence scans over 250 sources a day, about 1,000 articles per day, and it tags these to the relevant maps using natural language processing and concept recognition tabs. So now that I've told you a bit of the background, I'm going to get to the most important part, and I'm going to start the demonstration. Right, so this is the landing page of the Strategic Intelligence Platform. As you can see, multiple topics over here, and we have about 360,000 users at the moment, growing at approximately 5,000 per week. And we have right now got 267 maps. These are divided into various categories: economies, global issues, industries, and of course, the Sustainable Development Goals. So given what's come before and the very clear links Bianca has drawn between SDG 16 and SDG 4, I thought it would make sense to start on that map, the Quality Education Map. So this is the transformation map that I have been talking about. The core issue here, quality education in this case, and then the key issues on the inner node that unpacks those top of mind key issues related to quality education in this case. This text here, written by the human expertise, and then the machine intelligence that I was referring to is the feed on the right-hand side. So since my colleague Bianca has already discussed how we need to look at education moving outside of silos and building bridges, developing new curricula for education towards justice, I'm going to navigate to 21st century curricula as the key issue I'm most interested today. You can see that as I click that, the feed changes now to reflect that I've moved from the core issue to this key issue. And it's going to immediately bring up various outer ring maps that are relevant interconnections for this key issue. And given what we've been talking about before, and especially that wicked problems, as Dr. Smith said, wicked problems are largely based on people having different values, I'm going to navigate through to our values map. So this is our values map. As I mentioned, we take from our expert network our co-curators, and in this case, it's Bocconi University. They have done the expert curation of this summary and each of these key issues that you will see here. Now, on this map, understanding that values is fundamental to affecting this process. Education shapes people's values, and those values determine long-term behavior. We're looking now at behavior supporting SDGs. So I'm going to navigate through to the common good. I can read the expert co-curator's input here, but I'm also going to just have a look on these outer ring maps, and one that immediately comes to mind, given what we've discussed as well so far, of course, corruption. So on the corruption map, the interconnection between corruption and education is immediately apparent. I see the key issue, public awareness and education, right there. When I navigate to that key issue, the co-curator, in this case, University of Oxford, notes that education of citizens about corruption affects change through civic participation. So perhaps I will click through to the civic participation map, which is on this outer ring. Or I may just read further, perhaps under the collective action map over here. Now, what I find interesting and what I'd like to point out here is that aside from the publications feed, we also have videos, rich media under each of these maps, and we also have data. So under the collective action key issue, we have the modern slavery and child labor Earth Time story. Now, the platform itself has almost 80 Earth Time stories. Of course, we're currently in a very granular level of investigation, so only one is showing up. I will show you later on that there are multiple sources of data and also multiple Earth Time stories. The reason I wanted to bring up Earth Time stories is that it's one of our data visualization projects. It's a partnership between the World Economic Forum's Strategic Intelligence and Carnegie Mellon University. And the Earth Time Stories uses raw data and, in some cases, satellite imagery to map to forecast and review issues of global importance. So this one in particular looks at modern slavery and child labor, again, very relevant to today's topic. It shows you some of the flows, for example, the flow of cobalt from supply to demand countries. This map looks at rescues from forced labor rescues. The map that follows maps forced labor rescues alongside deforestation. So it allows you to take vast quantities of raw data and already start to quite quickly make some interesting connections with them. And this is available to users of the platform to perhaps use it in a presentation, perhaps use it to inform your research, etc. So I wanted to show that to you as one of the tools available on this platform. So having just gotten a very clear understanding of the importance of data and technology to this key issue, I may now navigate through to transparency enabling technologies. When I click on this, it brings up a number of technologies: artificial intelligence and robotics, the future of computing, the Internet of Things. I'm going to go to blockchain for several reasons, including that I don't have a great understanding of blockchain, but I know it's going to be extremely important in the future. So that makes sense to me as something I would like to get an expert briefing on. So on blockchain, our co-curator is Imperial College London. The first thing I will do when I get here is download a briefing. Now, as someone who used to work for government, I know that you're oftentimes called upon in government to become an expert on something very quickly that you may not have had much previous interaction with. And the dynamic briefing, among other things, is really useful for that. So this is a PDF version of the map we've just looked at. It's got everything, it's got the map itself, and then it's got everything that the expert co-curator has written, the summary, each of the key issues are outlined here, and of course, some of the most relevant feed articles and publications are also here. Each of these is direct hyperlinks, so you could link straight through to those articles. With this PDF, you can save it, you can print it, you can share it with your team, you can share it beyond your team in case that's useful. And it's dynamic in that if I download it tomorrow, what I will find here under the latest knowledge will be different. It will be reflective of whatever the map currently is pulling to the top of the feed on that given day. So that is the briefing tool. After this, I might narrow down my search for insight using the search function. So again, I'm going to go with our theme of today, education. Oops. There's an article on education. I can also do corruption. Multiple articles coming up on corruption. And interesting, they're showing me that blockchain is both going to support the end of corruption. For example, this article on blockchain supporting land registration and perhaps also support illicit financial flows. Under the data tab, there's another Earth Time story I'd like to show you. This is global remittances. I won't spend as much time on this one. I just wanted to show you again the power of using data visualization to get across the message of huge amounts of data, in this case, global remittances, and that an estimated $520 billion was sent home from migrant workers to mostly lower income countries in 2018. As you go through, you can see there's a ticker at the bottom that shows you how these change over time. Each of those dots on your screen is $1 million. It goes through each of the regions, but I will just scroll fairly quickly through to the bottom here, which shows the growth of Bitcoin accepting venues and remittances. And that's quite an interesting map for what we're looking at, because of course it implies that the blockchain is going to have hopefully positive, but certainly implications for this global remittance market, as it will affect, hopefully downwardly, the price of sending money home. So it's become immediately apparent to me in this time I've spent on the blockchain map that it has both positive and negative implications for governance and law. So I'm going to go straight to the governance and law key issue, and that brings me to a familiar topic that we've been dealing with this whole session, justice and law. The Justice and Law Map, co-curated by the University College of London. I'm not going to show you more Earth Time stories, I promise. I just wanted to show you that under this data tab, there are multiple Earth Time stories and other sources of data. Of course, we have SDG 16 data reflected here, and that is also possible to click through directly to that source. And then finally, following the science and innovation theme that I've now developed in my search through the maps, I will click on this key issue, and that brings me full circle back to education and skills. From this page, I can continue to navigate through the maps. I could change the languages of the maps. At the top here, we have an option for me to change into any of these languages. If that was more useful, if those were more useful to me, I might want to go into the publications and deep dive into further into those. I might want to continue my path through the maps. But what I'm going to do is stop here as we've come full circle, and I'm going to move on to another feature of the platform that I would like to bring to your attention. So over here, you're able to create a map. If you are a digital member of this platform, you're able to create a map. The idea here is that you can customize a map to look specifically at your project or your research that you're doing or just your field of interest. And you can search through on the left-hand side our over 900 packages of expert curated content. You simply would type it in, for example, education, you'd add a couple, and it will automatically bring the interconnections and that system with it when you populate it onto your map. Now, this is just for me to show you how quick and easy it is to do, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and go back to my colleague as he has gone ahead, Abhinav, and already made a map for us. So Abhinav, if you can share that map that you have kindly created. So Abhinav has created this map. These are the results of the poll that we asked you to fill out at the beginning of this session. We've managed to take those results and, just as I've been talking to you, build a map in real time. And he'll show you now how quickly it is to save it and close it, and it's going to come up as its own new custom map. So here we have a custom transformation map. The feed works like any other feed of any other map. It's dynamic. It's going to change every day. It's a tailored feed that is based on the signals you have put in by selecting those key issues. The key issues are populated because they are pulled from across the platform, so they're already populated packages of content. The video tab and rich media will be populated. The data tab will be populated. And this is now available to you. You can download a briefing as you could with any of the other maps. You can share that briefing with your team again or with colleagues, and you can keep coming back to your own map that you created to see the latest publications, the latest knowledge on this topic, so you can really keep abreast with it at all times. And then if I can ask you to go to the final feature I'd like to show, which is the monitor tab. Once you've created this map and you've spent some time on the platform, you have the monitor feature. And on this tab, you're able to really curate a feed to suit yourself and your interests. So you're going to see that on this one, we have a perfect emerging theme, considerations for inclusive education. And at the top, you can also click on any of the maps that you are following at any given time, and you're able to curate your feed to follow whatever your interests are. There's an overview of the most important articles coming out at the moment on this emerging theme. You can dig deeper into any of these, and each of these is a hyperlink directly back to the original article. Thanks, Abhinav. I think you can stop there, and I will just say that that brings me to the end of this presentation. I have left our details there, and my details as well are on the screen now if anyone wants to reach out about this. And also our website, the Strategic Intelligence Platform website, is there. Thanks very much.
Wow. Thank you very much, and thanking colleagues behind the scenes in the background with a live demonstration. I mean, I can start by saying, wow, that is hugely impressive. It's incredible to see the visualizations, incredible to see so much data, so much knowledge, so much. There was even something about stakeholders there. And if I could ask David to join back as well, put on your video. Just one quick question, Baroni, before I go to the panel. People are asking about how do they get it? Is it available free of charge? Is it in the public domain? Could you just say a few words about that?
Sure. So please do go to the website. Everything that I've shown you in terms of content is free of charge. You can sign up, you use your email address, and you're able to access the maps, you're able to access the contents, you're able to follow those linkages. If you want some of the additional features like the create feature and the briefing feature, that does have a small cost and it would involve you becoming a digital member. Please do have a look at that. We also offer it as a free trial initially. And one of the reasons I left my email address at the end there is especially with the public sector, if you have interest in finding out more about this, whether it's useful to you, whether you might want to use it, we're happy to engage and see if we can find the middle line somewhere with respect to that.
Thank you very much. Right, so we've had a number of different viewpoints. We've had discussion about some of the tools that we've seen from UNODC, from WEF, etc. The big question that's coming up is, okay, this is all very well. We understand this now. We get it. There's this interconnections, etc., between SDGs. We can see these interconnections. We can get all this data. What do we do about it? How are we going to do this? How are we going to bring people together to be multi-strategic, as one person put it in the comments, to be able to genuinely shift multiple pathways simultaneously to get these win-win transformations? I knew that was going to be a tough question. I'm going to add to the question because another person has commented about the fact that one of the challenges is that funding is quite siloed. You can get funding in a certain area of education, or you've got your health funders. So the question is, if we want to have this transformational approach across multiple SDGs, how do we do it if the funding isn't there? So let's hear some thoughts, some ideas about how do we get started? How do we make this happen?
I think at one time I would have said, well, government should take the lead and try to build a consortium of partners working together. On the other hand, I think the most successful things I've been involved in were when I was actually working in the NGO sector and academia. And it may very well be that this is a place or a space for NGOs to step forward and try to broker partnerships and groups of people working together on specific issues. I think we're more likely to succeed on specific issues because people can focus on that and it takes away from some of the broadness. But then we've got to approach it with, as I think one person pointed out, not just a multi-stakeholder group, but also a lens that looks at the multi-disciplines and the multiple problems that focus on a particular problem. So I have a great deal of faith in the NGO sector, having worked in it many years myself. And I think that there may be the ability to transform starting from there, but definitely that doesn't let governments off the hook, nor does it let businesses off the hook. But they may be the people to get the spark started.
But what is the starting point, though, David? I mean, we see this already. You know, there are platforms that bring organizations around particular issues. That's fine. That's happening all the time. The question is, how do you have the multi-issue platforms? And is this then about multiple NGOs coming together. So you've got your NGO in agriculture, your NGO in water, your NGO in energy, realizing there's a nexus across those, and then somehow they're trying to create a bigger picture? Or
I think somewhere along that way, maybe if we'd mentioned several of those entry points. So for example, looking at food and food systems. To look at food systems on your own, it means that you might be able to make some limited progress in a small particular either geographical or thematic area. But one of the things we'd recommended in the report was to find ways of creating national platforms that allow people to come together and work. Now, government often takes the lead on those things, but part of the problem is that if the government is only looking at saying, well, how do we deal with the immediate food crisis, if that might be the problem, it doesn't necessarily tackle all the other problems that go along with it, nor does it necessarily tackle the reasons why you have a food crisis in the first place. And so looking at the factors that lead is very, very important, and trying to incentivize actual real partnerships is key as well. But yeah, it requires some transformations. It's not the way we normally work. The way we normally work is I get a bright idea, I write a proposal, I send it into a Rockefeller or a Ford Foundation, I get some money and I get something done. Or if I work in government, then I go and apply to the EU or an OECD overseas development agency, and that's the way things work. But that has led to limited progress, and we are going to have to kind of look again at the way we work and actually work with each other. Possibly academia may also be a way of pulling things together. And I know that the IAU has put universities in groups to try to pursue different aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals. That might be one particular way in which partnerships could be pulled together as well.
And I see just on here that Sarah Baird talks about the fact that in the NGO sector, especially grassroots organizations, have that level of flexibility. And so in order to work across silos, across missions, so maybe there's something about the level at which you work as well. I think we have Bianca and then Jorge and then Florian. Please, Bianca.
Thank you, Darian. How do we get started? I think by starting with a more comprehensive approach. And what I've tried to share is how we as UNODC, and we're also facing, of course, the financial challenge, because I mean, our budget is more than 90% voluntary funding. So we, of course, also face financial challenges. But what we have shown to stakeholders, to our donors, is that, you know, by partnering with new stakeholders, such as universities, we can actually reach more with less funding, with less money. And I think this is things that we need to show. And I think what Brioni and we wanted to show is also that information sharing is at the bottom of everything. And of course, we have an overkill of information. Thus, it's so important to have this trusted platform, such as the World Economic Forum or the Education for Justice platform, because their users can be assured that the information is valid, that it's peer-reviewed. And then what I've said, and also what is in line with what David has said, is bringing together different partners. We need often to start small, and yes, we need to bring in civil society, we need to bring in academics, we need to start small, and then we can grow over time. And I think the Education for Justice is a really good example of, you know, how we started in a small thing and how we have become a global initiative and have reached already a lot with not as much money as we would have needed if we would basically focus on our traditional approach. So it's a little bit a combination about thinking outside the box and bringing together new stakeholders, and also see what are the wins on both sides and what are our strengths, and then bring them together.
Right, yes, and of course the challenge is how you do that at scale across so many different issues.
Of course, but I think the United Nations has a good role in bringing together different stakeholders, but of course also together and closely linked with the CSO sector.
Great. I think, Hilge, I think you were going next. Apologies for the terrible pronunciation of your name each time.
Well, do you want to try in Dutch? Hilge? That would be worse. It's a difficult name, I know. So it's the French have turned it into Elige for those who want to try that. The IAU is one of those NGOs that started small 70 years ago. So we started by saying, okay, Universities need to work, and we need to understand who are the players around the world. We started an international handbook of universities, and next, the World Higher Education Database, where we list all the higher education systems, describe them, show what they are worth, and we also list 20,000 higher education institutions from around the world that they work on. So that's where we start with connecting the universities across disciplines and also see what they work on. Then we work at UNESCO, and what we do already now over the last 2 years a lot is to bring together the higher education sector and the governments. So we go to all the delegations and we explain what the role of higher education is.
I'm so sorry, but your sound is sort of cutting out, so it's almost impossible to hear. So I'm really sorry about that. We caught some of that, but I'm afraid we're going to have to move on because it's too difficult to hear.
But maybe I can still try, because the part that is really on this multi-stakeholder aspect is getting closer to all those delegations to UNESCO, explain what universities can contribute, how we can work together. And we see now lately over the last few months, many governments contacting us and trying to understand what universities can do. A very concrete example of cooperation, transformational connections and partnerships.
And that last bit came through clearly, which I'm delighted for, because I think this is quite exciting, the role of universities as potentially as one of these connectors, because of course across a university it's cross-disciplinary, and so any individual university or group of university is then able to be able to connect across silos, potentially, if you can get across the silos within the university. David, you mentioned about governments potentially having these national platforms or platforms at national level, and yet one of the challenges we see is that ministries don't work with each other. There's a real challenge in most governments for any ministry, including the UK government, absolutely, to actually work across issues. So yeah, it sounds like there does need to be almost a multi-stakeholder grouping to try and drive this forward, whatever resources that we have.
Yeah.
Brian.
I know I've heard many times about joined up government, and it still remains a very good idea, but it's very difficult to find people who can show good examples of how governments can do joined up government. I think, though, going quickly back to the NGOs, let's not think of NGOs only as small organizations. There are many successful NGOs that have managed to have global reach and also local reach as well. I spent quite some time several years ago working at different levels with the World Conservation Union, which is it is an international NGO that does great work for conservation. So let's not think of NGOs just as the small ones. The small ones are very, very important at the national and community level, but they can also they're also part of a network that can reach internationally. And I definitely put that together. And also maybe governments might try being less ambitious, inviting people to the table with academia on, say, national platforms, sustainable development councils, and so on and so forth. But possibly focus on one of those 6 entry points, and then maybe there'll be more success.
Right.
Thanks, Darian. I just wanted to address one of the first questions you posed, and I wish I could say, go here and click this link and there you will find your funding. Of course, it's never going to be that simple. I think for the strategic intelligence platform, what we're really trying to get across, and somebody posed this question as well in the Q&A box, is that it can't just be multi-stakeholder. You can't have a lot of people around a table talking about the same thing. It just turns into a talk show. It needs to be a strategic engagement. And that's what we're trying to facilitate with the platform. And essentially to help people make those connections. You may find once you start to engage with the work Bianca's done, the work that we have done, that somebody else is trying to do something similar. You might be able to reach out to them directly, be you a small NGO or a large NGO. And so it's really to help break out of those silos, because I don't think we're going to come out of any event with a tick box for how to achieve everything we're trying to achieve with the SDGs, but certainly just to be aware of the vast resources out there that are available to support you in whatever SDG or whatever goal that you are pursuing. And I think what's quite interesting for me as an ex-government, and you're talking about these government ministries and how they work in silo, how often we would either receive or send a government team to go and benchmark a policy in a foreign country where possibly you might have had another ministry doing something that would have been able to teach you that. And I think in our new world that we live in, we now all live in a post-COVID world, everything will be digital. So the fact that these tools are available to everybody, again, it's not going to be, here's your funding, but it's certainly a huge resource that might make these benchmarking practices, these research practices, these learning from others, finding possible partners to team up with, targeting funders, that little bit easier.
Now, we've got quite a challenging question here, which is really about the idea that things aren't going to change, that there's too much vested interest, and that this attempt at transformation is potentially simply going to fail. And that what's actually required perhaps is something along the lines of disruption rather than transformation. Existing institutions are unable to be transformed or revolutionized. We need disruptive initiatives. What do you think?
Well, if I can just say that when I read that question, if from my interpretation, disruptive is how Airbnb has disrupted the entertainment, the hospitality business. So if you're talking about disruption, you're not talking about transforming the institutions that exist. You're kind of talking about completely disrupting the whole system. And I think that both are possible. You cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can't achieve SDGs without the traditional stakeholders, the governments, the universities, the civil societies. By no means does that mean that we are not open to disruptive technology. Just, for example, the blockchain and the impact of blockchain on remittances is just one small example of how disruption, and it doesn't have to be technology, but I think it's the most top of mind in that respect, how these things can be disrupted. And if you can harness technology in the fourth industrial revolution in support of SDGs, in support of your funding, to track funding, there's incredible things that were developed in fintech in a very short amount of time during the Ebola crisis, for example. Just the fact is that when we face a crisis and we are having to come up with things in short space of time, we're able to disrupt very old, very traditional ways of doing things because we have to. So I think you can't let go of the transformative aspect because you can't let go of these traditional partners, but I think disruption is an excellent partner in that.
Agreed.
As COVID-19 then, could COVID-19 be seen as a huge disruptor to the whole system? Can we see COVID-19 has basically managed to get all sectors of society aligned around one common goal, and we've seen everyone from individuals to street groups, to community groups, through towns, to companies, through NGOs, through government, all working towards one sort of common goal. We've seen that momentum being built. How can we build that? But how can we build on that? How do we continue this idea that actually we are all in it together? And which is what COVID-19 has shown us. How do we continue that forward?
I think it may be useful to resist the urge to go back to business as usual. I know that there's a lot of pressure on governments all over the world to go back to the way things were before. And while some of the things we were doing before are worth going back to, COVID has definitely exposed inequalities, weaknesses, and problems in the systems, which we sometimes took for granted or decided that we would eventually get around to changing. And we may want to look very carefully at how we were forced to change and whether we want to keep hold of some of the things that we're holding on to now and try to use them to make life better and learn from the experience. On the other hand, I think we should also be a bit realistic in regard to the vast number of different values and objectives that people have even when confronted with a common enemy such as COVID-19. I think it's very, very clear that different individual and collective interests are playing out in terms of the way things are going back to where they were before, the sort of conflict between we need to turn the economy back on and we need to keep our people safe. And we need to learn, I think, a bit better on how we can do more than one thing at once. Otherwise, we aren't going to be able to grow out of this.
And somebody has suggested that one of the things we need to do is around the education element, which is around teaching kids around SDGs all through their education, so that actually the idea of there being some sort of common goal, common values and objectives around which all sectors of society can potentially can draw around could actually potentially happen. But the question is that going to be fast enough given the challenges that we have? Our societies need to transform incredibly quickly if we are going to avoid the worst excesses of climate chaos. Are we able to do that?
The forum has launched in response to the crisis, the Great Reset initiative. And one of the things that we have said on there is that it's been a horrific, the global pandemic has been horrific, but it's also an opportunity to build back in a more inclusive, a more responsible way. And that suddenly all going into lockdown made us understand what the world might look like with less pollution. It's a very clear, real, in your face way of showing you what the potential is of actually achieving some of those perhaps climate related SDGs. At the same time, it shows you what happens when the health SDG is ignored and health systems are not properly developed, and of course when social security systems are not developed. So I think it would be a huge and devastating waste to come out of this pandemic without being ready to build back better, which I realize is a cliche already, but not to use this huge lesson to reset. Hence the name of our initiative, that this is an opportunity to do things differently. I realize none of that actually offered a solution to how we do that, but I certainly think that there are ways of seeing this as an opportunity as well.
Yes, I definitely agree with you, Briony. And what we have seen in the last 3-4 months since the pandemic has started, it was an extreme increase to our platform. So people are now really interested in learning about different challenges, different threats that are organized, that are affecting all of us. And one good example is we're also working on wildlife crime. And as we all know, the pandemic started with wildlife, animal markets, etc. So we have seen now a huge interest, a great interest of educators at the primary, second, and tertiary to discuss this with the students, and also the pandemic using them basically as an incentive to discuss these issues at the primary, second, and tertiary level. So yes, I'm very optimistic that this pandemic has shown to all of us we're all in the same boat, and something that affects one part of the world will within weeks affect all the other parts as well. So yes, I think we can be optimistic, and yes, I definitely agree. We need to, and I've seen many comments on that, we need to discuss SDGs in the classroom, primary, second, and tertiary level. We need to also strengthen critical thinking already at the primary level, and we need to empower the educators to discuss this. And I also think also this virtual teaching has now shown that we can, if needed, adapt in a very short amount of time. So Darian, I'm the optimistic one here. I think yes, we still have time to change.
May I add one word, if you can hear me? And that is that the IAU really advocates as well along those lines of what you said, Briony, David, and Bianca, is that there is a very strong need as well for a whole of system approach to this, and a whole of institution approach to it when you talk about higher education. And that is where you will trigger the transformation in a better way, because it will allow to connect the non-connected, and it will allow to look at things in a different way.
Also, I'm just tempted to add that one of the solutions has been the increased use of technology to help us work from home and do all kinds of other marvelous things. One of the things we haven't done during COVID is to bridge the technology gap between those who have access to this marvelous technology and internet and those who don't. And so you could find very easily post-COVID that the inequality between the haves and the have-not with respect to access to the internet, with respect to use of the internet, becomes even more emphasized afterwards if we're not careful. And I'm very worried that we'll see a lot more of that.
So yeah, so the positives that have come from COVID-19 in terms of the rapid innovation around digital technology is clearly one of the levers that is going to be hugely important for transformation, but it's not distributed across the globe in a way that it absolutely must be. I'm going to ask you all to just give a 30, just to round us off, just a sort of a 30-second sound bite at the end of this of your thoughts from having had this discussion. And while you're thinking about it, I just want to mention, I was a bit surprised that leadership hasn't come up in this discussion very much. Because if we are going to shift and transform the world in the way that we know we have to, we are going to need to see a new forms of leadership, and leadership at every level, I suspect, from multilateral leadership through prime ministerial or presidential leadership, all the way through down to whatever level you're working at, down to a street level. We need people to stand up, take a stand, and really help to drive forward transformations. And with that, let's hear your final little 30-second soundbite. We'll go around the order I see on my screen, which is Prione, you're first on my screen.
Typical. I'm still scratching out my thoughts. But no, thanks, Darian. Just to say, I think it's going to become increasingly important to navigate accelerated complexity. And we really hope that people leave today with the awareness of a tool that's going to help them with that. Please do go on our platform, make use of the experts on there who have unpacked these concepts, and you spend some time to navigate through the maps and make your own connections. I think I followed a certain path through the maps. Of course, there are almost infinite possibilities that you can, and we've really tried to show that the SDGs are so interconnected, but not just with each other, but with beyond. And hopefully that might complicate things, but hopefully it might also really be able to facilitate some solutions.
Fantastic, thank you. Bianca.
Thank you, Darian. Leadership. I agree with you. Strong leaders are needed, but it's a catch-22, and I think education is key for strong leaders, because we, the society, we also need to put pressures on our leaders. I mean, there's a saying that we get the leaders that we deserve. So maybe we also have to strengthen our societal approach on that. And for that, education is key. Plus, I have a big hope in the leaders of the next generation. If we educate them, if they better understand the SDGs, then we might have in a few years' time the strong leaders that I have. And in the meantime, I think civil society and us, we need to put pressure on the leaders to have really strong leaders in place. And for that, we need an educated society. So again, the nexus between SDG 4 and SDG 16, I still consider crucial. Thank you.
Hilly.
Well, I will repeat, education is education, and it's through education that we will get the leaders that we want for today and for tomorrow.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you. Just to reiterate, mind matters more than money. And one thing we can definitely do in all countries is to build up human capital through education. That will have tremendous benefits regardless of which sustainable development goals we are trying to achieve. And we really should try to prioritize that. To go back to the example I gave at the beginning with regard to COVID deaths in the Caribbean, it wasn't the rich countries that did well, it was those that acted on the science available and made sure that everybody knew what was happening and then put in place good, sensible policies based on the science. And those were the countries that kept the numbers down.
Well, with that, and I think we've learned a huge amount around some of these key levers, the levers of education, of the power of the connection, and the power of data and knowledge, if it can be put in the right way into people's hands. Mind matters more than money, and we need the leadership to be able to drive these things forward. I'd just like to thank very much indeed well, first of all, some of the organizers behind this, which are our UNDESA colleagues and UNITAR as well, and then thanking the attendees, and then most of all, thank you, the panelists, very much for a really, really interesting and thoughtful conversation. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thanks,
Darian.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks all. Good night, good morning, wherever you are.